Date with a Debut is recorded and produced on Awabakal Country, and I pay my respects to all elders past and present and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
I felt like there was such a temptation to recreate, those we've lost. And we see that actually pretty commonly. So that really got me thinking about how actually science fiction feels like a very natural sort of medium to talk about grief. Technology, weirdly enough, we keep reaching for it as a solution to death.
Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you're looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, host of the show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review. It really helps the show out. If you also want to hear episodes when they drop, be sure to subscribe to Words and Nerds, or you can subscribe to Date with a Debut on Podbean to hear the latest episodes as they drop. Want to support the show more? You can also subscribe to my Patreon in the description to get early access to episodes, book reviews, recommendations, and a whole lot more. Wherever you are listening, thank you for listening to us and supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. Today, I'm joined by Silvia Park, whose stories have been published in Black Warrior Review, Tor, The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and elsewhere. We're here to talk about their brand new sci-fi speculative fiction debut, Luminous, published by Maggie Press in association with Bloomsbury, which you can get a copy of right now in the description. We will discuss some mild spoilers, so I recommend you grab a copy now, or at least very soon. I started off by asking Silvia about their interest in science fiction storytelling, and having taught fiction writing at the University of Kansas, what lessons they learnt bringing their debut novel into the world. Silvia, welcome to Date with a Debut.
Hi, Nick. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I know we were kind of talking about beforehand. I missed you coming down to Australia when you were here to sign copies of your book, and I know you because you spend a lot of your time between Lawrence and in Douglas County and in Kansas and Seoul. Did you enjoy, first of all, being in Sydney and kind of getting down to an Australian audience?
Oh my gosh, I loved Sydney. Sydney was absolute joy. I think it's like that wonderful combination of the food's fantastic. You guys have nailed breakfast. And the coffee, the food, and also I just think I really enjoyed the way art and sort of like culture mix with a laid-back lifestyle. Like that's really, really rare. I think any epicenters of art and culture, it's really hustling, like it's a hustler's market. But I felt with Sydney, there was just this joy sort of like in just every angle that I really enjoyed.
That's really nice to know. I will take that to the bank when it comes to cultural stuff. Was it your first time in Australia? It
was. I was with the joy of going to a new country is when you also have a friend who's local. So my friend's originally from Perth, and she and I got to meet in Sydney. So we did, I did book stuff, but after that I got to play a lot. I had to do a lot of playing.
Which is good. Now, I'm holding up a copy of the book now for all the folks on our YouTube's channel. This is the Aussie version, but there is another cover as well for the North American version, which will come up in a second online. Does it feel? I know we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but does it feel weird that your book is out there in the world now?
Yeah, I just try to forget it every day.
I think it's fair. It's because I know that you've done a lot of short stories, and I know you also teach fiction at the University of Kansas. Out of curiosity, now that you actually you've got the proof that you have a book out there in the world. Is there anything that you actually picked up on now, having finally birthed a book into the world, that you didn't know when you started, that you go, oh, I should take that into my teachings and learnings when I'm working with students?
Well, first I want to correct something. I don't know if I've written a lot. I was actually doing a podcast with another Aussie from Perth. I'm not going to name names, but so he's an editor, very, very, established, renowned editor in the sci-fi fantasy world. But he was like, so you wrote this book. your last short story that I published came out in 2018. And then he just paused and he said, did you write nothing else?
Savage!
I know. I was just like, I'm sorry. That's all I wrote. A book.
I mean, like, yeah, it's not a small task at all. I mean, I'm speaking here from personal experience. Like, my first book was published in 2020. And I'm still going through the first draft right now. It's hard work. It is tough work. So, particularly whether it be short story or any sort of fiction. So, I'll back you up on that one.
Yeah, I think it's editor's bias. Just that, they don't know what it's like on the other side.
That is so funny. Such a funny reaction. I must admit, when this book kind of got pitched to me originally, obviously a lot of the promotional advertising and stuff immediately points to stuff like Clara and the Sun as something to compare it to. And kind of before I dived in, I knew that this book was going to touch on a lot of subjects, AI ethics, existential themes. But I know that one thing that really got me at the end was when I was reading the acknowledgements. And I know that you experienced a major loss in your life that you kind of allude to, which was a major factor in this book. And I'm kind of curious. It got my attention. I'm curious as how this led to your decision to channel that into a sci-fi spec fic story. Out of curiosity, where does sci-fi sit with you? What does it mean to you?
Right. No, I think, I think there's a lot of origin. There's a lot of different ways to talk about the origin of the book, whether I'm talking about it as, as a science fiction novel, as an adult novel, because I think in my acknowledgements I also mentioned that it started as a children's book.
Yes, that's right.
And I think the reason why I ended up really kind of channeling the book in that direction with the idea of loss and grief in mind is I felt like there was such a temptation to recreate, those we've lost. And we see that actually pretty commonly. Even cloning has actually become surprisingly widespread and quite casual. Like I was talking to another author at a festival, and this is back in Auckland, and she's from Argentina. And she was just very casually saying that their Argentinian sort of Trumpian president went to Korea to clone his favorite dog. And now he has 5 of them, just like at home, like 5 clones of his beloved dog. And it made me think about, and that's so fascinating, right? We used to talk about cloning as this like magical, this very ethically complex subject, but it's become actually so integrated into our life and our society without even noticing. Like there was no sort of like big announcement. There was Dolly the sheep, but now fast forward a couple years, decades later, and now actually rich people can clone their pets. And they clone their pets because they know when they bring in a pet into their life, like a dog or a cat, they know they are bringing in a ticking time bomb. They're bringing in essentially like walking tragedies, that they're going to bring something in to love dearly, and they're going to lose it. Their dog or their cat is going to pass on eventually. So that really got me thinking about how actually science fiction feels like a very natural sort of medium to talk about grief, because science fiction, technology, weirdly enough, we keep reaching for it as a solution to death.
It's time for us to do the classic elevator pitch. So I'm here, I'm in the lift, I'm going up, you with me. Tell our listeners, what is Luminous about?
So hard.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, I think every author struggles with this, but I feel like I kind of have a leg up in explaining why this book is so difficult to explain. And so my perfected elevator pitch now just sounds so hokey, but I like to say that Luminous is a Frankenstein's monster. The flesh is science fiction. The spine is police procedural. It's very noir. But really the heart of the book is a family drama. It's about 2 siblings who have not spoken to each other in many years because they lost a brother when, 14 years ago when they were quite young. And that brother was actually a robot. So the way they cope with that loss and the love of a robot brother, that's really what I think is the heart of Luminous. Because I think actually there are already a lot of really great stories out there about sort of, imagining our future with our relationships with robots that are especially in like romantic, like there's her, there's Annie Bot, there's a lot of many great stories. But I think what I really want to focus on is how robots might become family.
I'm so glad that you changed and highlighted that it's not just a spec fic, and this is one of those books where I first of all I kind of sympathise with the difficulty of trying to summarise it, but also that it is so much more than just a science fiction categorization. This is something that really straddles a lot of different genres and boundaries and wide overarching concepts, and I love that you bring it back down, which is down to its kind of family drama, which is really at the center of this. But the subtext and other stuff around it is incredibly critical, and I think the best place that I want to kind of start with by asking you about is kind of something which we again kind of talked a little bit about beforehand, which is that you've set this is set in Korea. I feel like setting is really important in this book. This is a very colorful, multifaceted, complex, wild, and dense world that you have made in this future. But this future is definitely no utopia. Korea has reunified, but the scars of the past are still very, very clear. The South and the North, there are clear differences in technology, in capabilities. I mean, immediately I thought of my own German heritage and how that translated back between East and West Germany when the war came down in 1989. It's a bit of a broad question to open talking about this book, but talk to me about setting here, because there's not only the science fiction elements that you're kind of playing with here, but you're putting it in the historical context of this place in Korea, and also specifically with the whole idea of the reunification of Korea on the page. Talk to me kind of about that, because I think setting is really critical.
Right, and setting actually came last when I was working on the book. I started with the characters. I started with how sad and depressed and messed up they were, and then I kind of dealt with the AI, the robotics, and setting it in Korea was a pretty late decision in the process. I think it's because originally I felt like, you know what, I'm just going to kind of set this vaguely in the future, because I didn't want to make any precise predictions about artificial intelligence. I didn't want to like date it. I didn't want to specify this is the year 2049. And it actually was quite prescient of me, because I started writing this book around like a little before the pandemic, and already like the way we see AI has changed. AI has really started ravaging our society and our future. And I'm glad in some ways that I wasn't trying to date the book, but also I realized that I did have to set it in Korea. And I think part of that is thinking about science fiction, thinking about sort of the history of science fiction, particularly the genre of cyberpunk. I know there is a pretty kind of mixed, complex history of cyberpunk really appropriating Asian traits. It's called techno-orientalism, and without actually centering Asian bodies or Asian stories. And oftentimes, like when we look at, like I remember I saw this scene from Blade Runner, the latest Blade Runner film, and Ryan Gosling, he's like, it's like really stoic and good looking, and he's just marching over to this building, this desiccated building that has Korean words on it. It had the words Hingwon on it. And what was so surreal is that when I saw him approach this destroyed building with those Korean words, kind of like in this like vast, stormy desert, my immediate sort of like jolt was, what happened to Korea? Like it was a future that wasn't acknowledging the existence of Korea or the existence of Koreans, but was using sort of remnants of Korean culture just to kind of gild the setting so that it looks futuristic, that it looks, oftentimes Asianness is associated with futurism, but it didn't, but I wasn't sure what happened to Korea in this world. And Korea is never mentioned. Korea is not a big part in this story. And that's when I realized that for my book, actually, I had to make sure Korea still exists. I didn't want to set in this far future where nations have just broken down. They've all blurred into each other. I could have written a story like that, but I actually realized as I started working on the characters and sort of the heart of the story, I realized that my book, I was writing something really nostalgic. It was like sort of like a nostalgic science fiction. And because of that, it was important for me to really tap into my own nostalgia about growing up in Korea. And that's how I ended up really just copy and pasting a lot of my own memories, a lot of my own sort of like the texture of childhood memories into this book.
Yeah, it really comes through because it's a very colorful environment. Even before we kind of we get into the science fiction elements here, and the kind of things that you play with from a historical context, not only because because obviously that history, our history, in this far future has still happened, but and it colors a lot of the characters' decisions and where they're coming at and the headspaces that they're all in. It defines this career that is in front of you, and that is presented on the page. I find that so interesting that you kind of that you started this book before the pandemic, and a whole thing around the kind of experiences you had with AI. And I must admit, I kind of approach topics about AI with a lot of trepidation, partly because in my role, I mean, I've worked in the online space a lot and kind of been at the coalface of a lot of this technology, working in social media, working in creative spaces. And I've, in my own head, and I think this is kind of important to mention because you kind of tackle this topic quite well, I've personally taken a very pessimistic view of AI because, I've seen authors' work stolen to teach AI. I've worried about AI diminishing the value of creatives and having traditional creatives, no matter be they a writer, an artist, a musician, a filmmaker, have them kind of effectively on the run by having a lot of this creative stuff affecting it. And then the moral complexity that kind of comes through with that is kind of a key part that colors and this tapestry of this world that you have created, because I kind of tried to wrap my head around how you actually had to balance all of these sci-fi elements with all of the robots and the technology and the AI, because what's great is you show it in many different forms. On one hand, technologies can serve as an excellent tool and a life enhancer. There's a great subtext around disability with one of the characters that I personally really latched onto, because people in my family could benefit from that sort of technology. But then there's also the cultural connotations that come with that. Also, again, from being in Korea, I mean, this is also a world where people look at specific numbers on floors and being struck off because they're seen as unlucky. And then there's the whole ethics of AI in the products, because this is still a capitalist kind of environment. How hard is it to think about all these things? Because that's a dense challenge.
Yes, so that's why I want to tell that previous editor, this is why I wrote nothing else. This is why I couldn't churn out, 5 stories a year. No, I ended up just working with this one. I ended up having to really kind of, simmer in this book for a while, particularly because I was definitely greedy. I think that I really wanted to capture sort of that interstitial experience of living in this world where people who are very different will see this world really differently. And I hope that I conveyed that with the different point of views. Like one character who, like you mentioned, who's living with a disability will see technology in a completely different light from, say, another character who's also living with a disability but has survived a war that utilizes technology to such breathtaking creative destruction. And so that was sort of my goal. I think the way I grounded myself was by really focusing on the characters and how their sort of limited perspective gives me an entry to their particularly, a very colored perspective to how they interact with the world, with the technology, and how sort of their identity makes use and reacts to the technology in very different ways. So I have one character who's also trans, and technology has now changed the way we work with gender in such a fascinating way. And I think it already has. When we look at the way the internet, when we look at the way social media and the way we can also manipulate images, but also build communities. It's completely changed the way we talk about gender and the way we absorb gender. And so I imagine that with this particular character, gender is completely in flux. The gender is also now complicated by the fact that you're now in bodies that might not entirely be biological.
I think it's time for us to actually talk about these three mains, or these kind of three characters that are at the crux of your story, because again, this is this is the center, this is the heart of the piece. It is a family drama, and it is also where kind of the idea of what makes us human and the value that we place on that kind of comes through. And I think the great place to start is Jun, one of the three siblings, former soldier, a veteran of the war that led to the reunification of Korea, now working as a detective in the robot crimes unit, and is tasked with tracking down this robot daughter, effectively. He kind of feels like a microcosm a little bit to this wider story. He's living in an advanced career, and he's working as a policeman, as a law enforcement in this advanced society. But he's also someone very marked by history and very marked by the context that has happened on the peninsula. Tell me a little bit about Jun.
No, I think that's a great way to describe it. I feel like in some ways Jun's body is sort of like a historical record for how Korea has transformed and how it's been transformed by robotics, by technology, and the way technology has now completely infiltrated and really rooted itself in all these different worlds. Because the worlds that Jun occupies, he always has one foot in one world and the other in the other. Like, for example, he's military, so he's ex-military, and now he has to adjust to the civilian world. He is transgender, so he's also kind of working with, this idea of moving between genders, particularly because his surgery was so tied to his military experience. And then there's also the fact that he's bionic. He's part machine. And that stems from this military accident that has destroyed his biological body. But I think for him, what I was particularly interested in is how he really thinks a lot about this idea of performance and passing. And that's something that I think really ties Jun to robots and what he realizes robots are doing, which is that robots are performing. They're performing humanity. They're pretending to be human because that's what we've created them for. And again, I wrote this book back in the pandemic, but I think it's so interesting that when AI started becoming like a really hot button topic and just, stocks, right? It just started taking over the market. It's not because the technology was like suddenly like there and it was never around. Artificial intelligence has always been embedded in our technology. It's been part of Tesla. It's been part of so many different, it's had different shapes and forms. But the way AI started exciting people is when they realized that AI can be convincingly human. When ChatGPT can ask about our feelings, can tailor responses and be an even better therapist, a free therapist until you subscribe for the pro model. But essentially, it's when AI started being able to convincingly pretend being human, that's really when the conversation shifted and money started pouring in. And I find that really interesting.
Jill is such an interesting character in this because of, when you're talking about that performative thing, one of the things I also thought of when reading it was immediately like the performative nature of gender kind of comes through in that a little bit as well. I immediately thought of Judith Butler and all of the work that Judith Butler has done on talking about the whole idea of gender being performative and some of the context around that. And then you also contrast it with the other sibling, Morgan, who is kind of coming at this in a very different headspace, a programmer at the robot making corporation Imagine Friends, who are in the midst of getting ready for the release of this new robot kind of child. And they're struggling to find intimacy with a robot boyfriend, which is also a source of embarrassment. Oh God! So Morgan was such a provocative character. I mean, off the back of Blade Runner, I immediately thought of Philip K. Dick, When Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Black Mirror, the episode Be Right Back with the whole intimacy story there with a loved one who has passed away. But even also connections to off the back of the setting of this place, I mean, the stories that you hear about the challenges young people face in South Korea today, that the population is aging at a fast rate, young people are working in such a heavy work environment, so they're having less children, and the chance to actually have a family is diminishing with more time. Morgan just felt like such a, boiling it down to one person, of course, set in the far future, but boiling it, she was such a meeting point, and that's even before you get into the kind of the moral discussions of her kind of being at the coalface of providing these robots that are seen as not as human, not as equal.
Right. I think that it's funny that you say that Morgan feels like a representation, like sort of a microcosm of all of these issues, because if I had to kind of really like boil her down to just like one emotion, like, get rid of all the impurities, I would say loneliness. She's a really lonely person. And I think that every decision she makes is out of that fear and loneliness. And whether it's, the way her ambition manifests, the way shame gets in the way of her relationship with the boyfriend she perfectly designed, perfectly to her needs. But she's the one who's self-sabotaging that relation, even though she's the one who created him and has tailored him to exactly what she thinks is her ideal, but which is basically a famous Korean actor, very hot. But essentially, I think that all of the choices she makes is spurred by this loneliness. So I think it's quite sad if she is supposed to be a representative of a lot of problems in, a lot of first world nations, or let's strike that. I hate that term. And if she's supposed to be a microcosm of a lot of nations that are driven by technology and have been affected by technology and capitalism, hyper-capitalistic societies, then I think hyper-capitalism or late-stage capitalism has really rendered us into such isolation, where we feel that we become so competitive that we can't lean on each other. We always have to appear successful. We always have to appear as if we have our life in order.
And I'm so glad you kind of mentioned boiling Morgan down to loneliness, because there was so many. It kind of brings us back to a lot of the other things where I realized, oh, that's what this person was about. And for me, there was one particular character that really grabbed that metaphor of grief, which is really permeating through this story, and that is, the last in this trio of siblings, which is Yo-Yo, their missing, presumed dead robot sibling. Robots are in this world perform all sorts of tasks. They're lovers. They're servants. They look after people, but they're not considered equal. And yet, despite these, Morgan and Jun coming at this in this world from different perspectives, also themselves, there's a lot of separation and loneliness there. As children free of biases, they considered Yo-Yo equal, their sibling. They believed them to be human. And of course, there's a whole other subtext with their father, which we won't get into, which for avoiding of spoilers. But tell me a little bit about Yo-Yo, because doesn't feature a humongous amount, but an incredibly critical part of this story, and really where this family drama is kind of at its crux.
Yeah, I think you pinpointed it, which is that June and Morgan see Yo-Yo as an equal. They see him not only an equal, but now, because they are recalling in their childhood memories, they've sort of painted him as sort of this mythic figure. And one thing that once I pointed out during an interview, I pointed out that actually in this book, Yo-Yo never appears from the perspective of an adult. So you only see him through the perspective of a child. And that was really intentional on my part. I think that for me, because I'm really focusing on wanting to write about and explore what our relationship is going to be like with robots as family, it means that we're exposing robots to children, and very likely going to be raising children with robots or through robots. And I just find that so fascinating, the idea of what is it going to do to our children? Like, is it going to make them inherently more empathetic, or is it going to cause troubles, make them spoiled, make them dependent? I think it can go really any other way. I think it really depends on the person, the family. But I wanted to focus on how essentially these children who are growing up with this robot who looks like a child, for them now, when they look back on this robot brother who's disappeared, this robot brother really ends up, he feels frozen. And he's always felt frozen to them because he never ages. And that was one of the challenges I wanted to portray. The imagination that, if we really do start having a relationship with robots, we're having a relationship with these creatures or these creations that are fundamentally never going to change in terms of appearance. They might change inside. In fact, I think Steven the robot is a really good example of someone who changes very, very quickly on the inside. But I think that the fact that robots will never physically age or transform, that's something that I find really fascinating. And I think it's going to really affect the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to aging and growing up, as well as death.
Usually when I kind of talk with these books, I usually kind of like to finish these discussions by asking the author, what did this book teach you? I discard the question of what do you want readers to get out of it. Readers will get out of it whatever they can. But with yours, I feel like I kind of have a unique opportunity here because I'm not surprised this book took you since 2018 to use, because it's a dense, complex book. And first of all, you should be really, really proud of it, because it's there's a lot of stuff to wrangle here. You're talking about what constitutes being human, what it means to being human, what grief means. These are huge topics and themes that have been wrangled over for many, many years and have been covered in many different subjects and topics and different mediums. So instead I want to ask, what did Luminous, the process of writing Luminous, the process of editing Luminous, the process of being in this world, give you as an answer to these age-old questions of what it means to be human?
Besides, like, white hair.
That's a great answer.
I mean, I definitely aged, unlike the characters in this book. What did this book do for me? Interesting. That's a great question, because I think, in some ways my answer feels like it could apply to almost every author out there, because I do feel like a book that you spend a good number of years on, whether it's 3 to 5 to 5+ years. In some ways, that book it becomes sort of this offering, this sculpture for this chunk in your life. You've closed a chapter. So this book really represents my 20s. It represents sort of the questions I was having, the anxieties I was having about both existing in this world, but also where is this world headed? Where is our society headed? And that's what this book feels like. It feels like sort of a testament as well as an offering for that period in my life. And now I'm very excited to close it. I'm very excited to leave it behind. Is what I thought until I opened my eyes, and now, hey, AI is everywhere. AI is sort of like the big existential question. And I actually did an event. I taught a lecture at a university in Korea, and I just kind of chuckled as I addressed the students in the audience, and I was like, I feel so bad for you guys. and I felt really bad to say that. But I think, yes, I think that there's now so much concern. There's a concern for actually this question about our souls. And it's the reason why I'm saying that is because later on, I know you're going to ask me what's a book that's really been on my mind. And it's Joy Williams, Concerning the Future of Souls. But I think that title really now encapsulates sort of our existential fear of AI, because the fear of AI is not so much about robots going Terminator style and destroying us. Rather, what we've realized is that the danger of AI is exposing our immense weaknesses and our greed and our short-sightedness as humanity and amplifying it, encouraging us to indulge in that worst impulses. That's really what I've noticed is the fear of AI, and how corporations who have the most power don't care. As long as it's raising their, their quarterly reports, like they don't care. They don't care that our souls, whether we're being secular or religious or spiritual, they don't care that our souls are at risk and that we're giving up our humanity for the sake of something that just seems much easier and much more convenient. And the book Luminous that I wrote was not supposed to reflect present day anxieties about AI. Rather, it was supposed to be more of a metaphor about sort of how we become so isolated as people and how technology seems to be the solution for our alienation, for fear. But we are continuing to use technology in ways that are both, terrifying and horrific. Because particularly something that I don't want to go too much into spoiler territory, but there's a lot of gendered violence in this book
Yes.
that I think was really kind of it was saturated, because I think now I realize I was writing this book sort of like during post Me Too, and I knew that technology was going to be utilized in a way to harness evil. Like I think back to the trial that really kicked off sort of this year. Do you remember the Giselle Pellico trial with, that absolute just like horror of, husband, this loving husband, married decades, was destroying his wife every night, completely betraying her and bringing in strangers that he found in a chat room. And eventually, they found out by a fluke. They totally caught him by fluke. They rounded him up. But I remember when I saw that news break out, what I was very, very sad about is that I realized, because the criminal was a much, much older man, the way he used technology was very quaint. He rounded up people from within a manageable radius within his hometown or within the town they were living in. And he rounded up that kind of evil. But actually what technology does is that it can amplify and it can make evil uncatchable. It can make evil so profuse. So that's really what I was writing toward. I was writing toward those sort of anxieties rather than AI anxieties. So I hope that, I don't know, maybe what that means is that my book is now already dated out of the, just as soon as it came out of the gates, no longer applicable.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more than just. I don't think it's dated to a particular time. It feels more like a warning, than anything else, as to what's ahead, and but in particular in that context of the subject of technology. When technology was made, it was made and designed to be as a tool that could be enhanced and could be used. It took others to change it, corrupt it, cause it to be misused. It comes back to that whole, be corrupted in ways that the original creator could not have foreseen coming. And I think you're absolutely right in that the technology these days can sometimes be used to fulfill humanity's worst impulses. And it only is a means of, it's a tool by the means to do that when it was originally created with the best of intentions, and you cannot control that and manage it. Who knows if we're ever going to be able to figure that out? But Luminous forces you to think about that. So I think you should be really proud of it. It's a tough topic to cover.
Oh, thanks.
At the risk of kind of going, you've been with this amazing book, you've sat with this and dealt with these topics for so long. Out of curiosity, will you write again after a long break?
Yes, I will write again. And actually, I think I've given myself enough a break. It really helped that I was in Sydney. That felt like an indulgence when I was just going through the different neighborhoods. That was an utter joy, Bondi Beach. But basically, I actually feel sort of an urgency to write instead of taking a long break. One is because with the way America's being is, time ravages us all, but also America is destroying itself in so many different ways, which is just so horrific given how much this country, the potential this country has. And when I think about that, I think that in times of immense oppression, like art has to flourish because the moment art is silenced, then we've truly lost hope. We've lost hope
Yes.
that recording our experiences, our truths, like we feel that if it's futile, then we've lost sort of like that last sort of like candlelight. It's been snuffed out. So I feel an urge to write quickly. Also, particularly because a dear mentor of mine, he recently read my book, which I was not expecting. I, in fact, completely handed the book over to him. Did not expect him to read the book because it's not his genre. I don't think he reads science fiction at all. He usually he teaches like the Odyssey. He teaches really old stuff with dead people, like written by dead people. But essentially, when I think about his age, I really want to work on my next book quickly because he gave me the grace of reading this book that is absolutely not up his alley, but he still read it. He read it from beginning to end, and he encouraged me to write the next one. And I hope that I can, be more efficient, as my previous editor said, and hopefully be able to hand him a copy in time.
We will finish with a rapid fire part of the date where I fling a bunch of questions at you and you give me the first answer that comes to your head. So we're no longer in considered territory. We're in give me the first answer that comes to your head territory.
Wow, so, lightning round.
Lightning round. Sorry. First up, of course, is the question about your book tastes and things that you have, which you've already partially answered. But what was your favorite book that you've read in the last 12 months?
Yeah, so Joy Williams, Concerning the Future of Souls. I love that book. It's so slender and fiendishly clever. It's very playful. It writes about God in a way that's incredibly playful, which I don't think that's, it's usually not. Those are not two things you would associate with each other. So absolute joy.
Amazing. On the kind of the subject of that, there is a particular book that I think you would quite enjoy, which is kind of similar to the topics and discussions. Let me see if I've got my copy here. Here it is. It's called Mortals, and it's basically how a fear of death shapes society, which kind of does by it's a father-daughter duo of Rachel E. Menzies and Ross G. Menzies, and it does a deep dive into. It actually does talk about technology and the space of technology and using technology, basically the examining how a fear of death has shaped where human society is and where it is going. If you want to kind of sit with those topics a little bit more, just kind of mere. But look, it comes to a great conclusion, which I will spoil mildly. But at the end of the day, you cannot delay the inevitable and the truth, and that it should lead you in that. By acknowledging that everyone has their time in the sun, it enables you to live a better life, which I think is very valuable. What is your favourite debut that you've ever read?
Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I think it's fantastic. It's a book that feels like it wasn't written, if you know what I mean. Like it already existed as an artifact.
Oh, wow! That's never heard of that one. I'll have to add it to my 3-meter high TBR pile. But it is what it is. Do you have a favorite word?
Oh my god, I was going to say moist, but no, that's the opposite of favorite word.
I was been waiting for someone to say that word.
Favorite word. Favorite compliment that I ever pay anything is fascinating. Anything that fascinates me, I love it.
Oh, fantastic. Out of curiosity, what does grief mean to you now? Where does it sit?
I think grief is always anticipatory. Mm-hmm. Meaning that we actively try to forget it, really, actually. Because grieving, whether we're grieving something we've lost or someone we're going to lose, we have to kind of actively forget that. It's like we have to kind of, put our amnesia hat on in order to function in society or in order to live. And that's why sometimes, so I do think that, you should, sometimes we should allow ourselves to feel it, to anticipate grief, because anticipating grief, maybe it kind of ties into the book you suggested that you recommended so generously with Mortals. Anticipating grief can also make us realize just what is important.
There's a great metaphor that I found courtesy of a podcast called the Good Morning Podcast, spelled Mourning, and I think they describe grief as dust. That when it comes over you first, it gets into all the creases and the crevices, but over time, the dust dissipates. The initial dust dissipates, but inevitably, you always find it. It inevitably comes out. Whenever you kind of go into those creases and crevices and re-examine them, it always lingers.
Right.
Which I think is a nice way of saying you have to find a way to live with it.
Yeah. Also, we produce dust. We're very flaky creatures. I
hadn't thought of it like that.
So we're shedding it constantly too.
Literally and metaphorically. I believe that this is being made into a television series. Can you tell me any more?
I just know that, so it was actually optioned. The TV option was sold before I sold the book to a publisher. And yeah, that was really cool. It just raised my expectations to dangerous heights. And then I came crashing down.
Keeps you grounded.
Yes. I got to experience sort of like the ancient Greek, rise and fall within the course of a month. So that was great. But no, it's still under the works with Media Rest Studio. When they first, when the CEO first called me up and pitched or was trying to convince me to hand over my baby and pry it from my hands. Their studio has also worked with Pachinko, so they talked about sort of their experience with working with Korean production studios, with working within Korea, filming in Korea. So I thought that was very cool. So yeah, it's under option. They've now gotten some really, really cool people attached to it, whom I cannot name. but they have cool people attached, and now I just wait and I see if it's going to take off or die, like most projects.
I appreciate your grounded approach. It's the best way to approach things. Do you actually have a cat named Smaug? Please tell me that you should get one.
I know. I do. We do have a little black cat. No. If I got to name her, I would have called her Smaug, but alas, it's actually it's my dad's cat. So no, she has a different name. Her name is Esther.
Out of curiosity, is that your? Can you give me your favorite Middle Earth story or book off the back of now clearly having Smaug as the name of a cat in Luminous?
Oh gosh, it has to be The Hobbit, because I feel like Lord of the Rings is the epic, but The Hobbit is just so efficient in the way that the film adaptation was not.
I've never heard the Hobbit book described as efficient. Definitely not the film series, but
it's a delight. It's a delightful book, but it's also, for me, what makes The Hobbit really wonderful is that this is a book that could work both for children and for adults, and that's something that is truly hard to pull off, because we're not saying this is a book that adults secretly read or that adults are reading, but is clearly intended for children. Tolkien, I think, intended the book for adults, and yet children can read it too. And I think that's really remarkable. That's magical.
Still can't believe it was a debut, that one.
Was it? Oh,
yeah, I'm pretty sure.
That's hateful. I hope you took 7 years.
I just think to myself, like, whenever you have those people who kind of hit the ground running with like a big, massive book like that, I just go, how do the rest of us mortals compete? We cannot. We cannot compete with someone like Harper Lee or J.R.R. Tolkien, who suddenly just drop To Kill a Mockingbird or drop The Hobbit, bang, to kick off. God dang it.
Though I do wonder, Tolkien, that was his life work. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, it was all in the same world. It's, and in some ways, the same history, the same people. So the people that you just named, Tolkien and Harper Lee, they've only written really one book, one story.
My mind is blown. Final question: are you happy?
Yeah, of course. I just came from Sydney.
Aww, that's the quickest way to my heart. You silver-tongued devil, you. Oh, thank you. Well, I'm happy because I got to deal with this amazing, complex book and got to read it a lot. Silvia, we've reached the end of our date. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. For everyone listening, Luminous is published by Magpie Press and Bloomsbury. You can get a copy in the description right now. Silvia, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Absolutely, it's a joy.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It really helps the show out. If you want to hear episodes when they drop, be sure to subscribe to Words and Nerds, or you can subscribe to Date with a Debut on Podbean to hear the latest episodes as they drop. Want to support the show more? You can also subscribe to my Patreon in the description to get early access to episodes, book reviews, recommendations, and a whole lot more. Catch you soon! Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production.